In this video, we're going to talk about some ways to analyze and improve service. How to break an existing service down. How do you think about its parts and processes? How do you identify where things can go wrong, or where things can be improved, or simplified, or sped up, or whatever? We got to think about what the outcome is, what the components are, how it looks in context, what the different actors know and what they can do, and just generally how the processes go. And this is all pretty much before we even get to redesigning or designing things. So let's go back to the question of what a service is. I mean, what do you get out of a service? The service outcomes. We've talked about services as being like experiences, the accumulation of moments that make up your overall service experience. Your experience of Disneyland is not a single event, but it's a whole series of events that happened when you went there. Your plane trip to New York is not a single moment, but the series of moments, perhaps starting from when you priced the flight, booked the flight, packed your clothes, got to the airport, and so on. Your experience of Starbucks is not a single moment, but all the moments that you are there, that you order your drink, receive your drink, enjoy your drink. Good service provides good value. Simply put, you think it was worth it, whatever you paid, whatever you experienced. The trade-offs were more good than bad. That's what we mean by value. And we might consider other dimensions like, say, standardization versus customization. What's the relative value of getting a regular coffee for $2 versus getting some exotic coffee drink with other flavors and foams for $2 more? Are you happy with the standard kind of one-size-fits-all coffee? Or do you want yours the way you want yours? Is it worth it to you? Remember the service triangle, which was our basic way of thinking how service works? There are three parts: the customer, the frontline worker, and the service organization. We have to consider each of these three separately and in context. Remember the technique of service blueprinting. That's one way to put the customer, frontline, and service organization together into a single unified view of how service works. You look at what you see outside, what the customer does, what the frontline employee does, and what goes on behind the scenes, on the backstage. Processes that cut across these front and back boundaries tie the service together. Customer information, customer action, employee action, and supporting organizational processes. Checking into the hotel may seem simple, but a lot of stuff is really going on. This is one way to understand it and to identify possible issues and possible ways to improve it. To look carefully at the way a service works, we can look at the interaction intensity, how complicated is the customer-provider interface. We can distinguish low contact from high contact types of services. An example of high contact might be medical services like surgery. An example of low contact might be a retail counter transaction or even a self-service ATM at the bank. We can look specifically at the flow of information, objects, and people within a service encounter or service experience. And we can focus on what the customer does, how the customer is involved in co-production. You can think of interaction intensity as related to degree of customization. We'd expect that the more custom a service is supposed to be, the more the customer and provider have to interact. Customization requires information from the customer at the very least. What do you want in your coffee? The coffee shop has to know, has to interact with you to get that information. That's a pretty trivial example, but think about professional services like doctors or dentists or lawyers or consultants. They provide really customized services, very specific actions, medical procedures, very specific legal advice, and so on. They are highly interactive and highly skilled. That's the expected correlation. The more customized, the more interactive, the more skilled. The flip side is customer skill or knowledge and customer action. Well, maybe not really the flip side. It's related, of course. It's the customer side. What does the customer have to know, to do, to use the service? At Starbucks, you've got to know what the various options are. You've got to know how to say them. You might have to put your own milk in your coffee. I mean, whatever it is. This is a simple, silly example. The point is the customer is a critical part of service activities, of service processes. You can't have a service without customer input, without customer action. Sometimes you have to train or educate the customer to be an effective partner in this, like you have to learn to say venti instead of large. But like I said, it is not just the provider side or the customer side we have to pay attention to. We have to pay attention to both and to the roles they play in the overall process. This may be how the process, information, and people flow when the hotel guest calls room service. There are several different people involved: the guest, the person taking the order, the kitchen staff, the waiter who delivers it, and maybe others. There's information that has to flow from the guest to the kitchen. There's an order to process. There are all kinds of places where mistakes might happen, from the wrong order being written down to the food arriving cold. So what we're doing in this week's videos is we're looking at service processes, analyzing how they go, and how they can be improved. This means looking at the provider and the customer and how they work together. We're going to apply service design methods to help us.